Good morning, everyone. Welcome in. My name is Aaron Shaw. I am the Director of Natural Resources Programs at Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District and Chair of the Fort County CWMA Steering Committee. I want to thank everyone for attending our 13th annual pull together. And this continues to be the signature activity of the CWMA, and it has served to bridge our connections to one another within our community for over a decade now. This is the second year we're holding this event as a webinar conference, and I really hope that we can return to an in-person conference in 2023. We acknowledge that this last year has been yet another difficult one for many of us, and we're really grateful to be able to continue to grow our partnerships despite the physical distance we're all experiencing. And hopefully everyone is coming to us safe and doing well, considering this latest wave, latest round, if you will, the pandemic. So glad to at least see a bunch of numbers on the screen, if not faces. So we have a great event planned, albeit shorter than an in-person event, which is really designed to hopefully avoid yet another fatiguing Zoom experience for everyone. We have three main presenters on the agenda today. Tony Koop, a risk analysis with APHIS, will speak about the Plant Protection and Quarantine, or PPQ, tiered risk evaluation process. Pamela Slaughter, representing people of color outdoors, will speak about reclaiming nature for people of color. And Tim Campbell, Aquatic Invasive Species Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin Seed Grant Institute, will present on testing of commonly used invasive species message frames and metaphors on social media. We'll also have a Western Invasives Network and CWMA committee updates. And then finally, for those of you who have been with us in the past, John Wagner with East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District will entertain us with his annual presentation of live comics. So we're packing a lot into 3 hours, so hopefully everyone can enjoy the experience. Excuse me. For those of you looking for pesticide credits, we'll ask you to enter your name and license information into the chat at the end of the first half, and again at the end of the event to receive credits. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to Andrew. Andrew Felton, take it away.
Thank you, Aaron. So just want to give everyone a heads up. I've just shared the agenda for today's presentation, so that should be in the chat for anyone who wants to take a look at that. My name is Andrew Felton. I'm the Vice Chair of the Education Outreach Committee for the Fort County CWMA. I'm going to just go over a few housekeeping items for everyone just to kind of get you familiar with the Zoom platform if no one's used it before. So we are doing a webinar today, so everyone's cameras are off and their mics are muted. So they should, that's just one way for us to kind of avoid any disturbances throughout the day today. But you are able to hear us and you'll be able to see anyone who is speaking along the way. If you are having any audio issues in the Zoom invitation, there is some options and some ways, some instructions that you can go through to call into the event. So I'll just refer you to that. If you need to get that invitation just resent with those instructions, please feel free to shoot me a message or Courtney a message, and we can make sure to get that invitation back over to you. At the very bottom of your screen, you'll see two icons that we'll be using today. The first icon will be the chat feature. We'll be using the chat feature for any technical issues that you might be having. So if you're running into any technical issues where you can't hear, you can't see any of the presentations, please feel free to message myself or Courtney and we can assist that way. We'll also be taking attendance through that chat feature. As Aaron mentioned earlier, we'll be able to provide pesticides applicator credits for everyone who's in attendance, but we do need to make sure that everyone who is here is actually here. So at that time that Aaron has mentioned, we'll be asking for both your name as well as your license ID numbers to be entered in the chat to receive attendance credits. For the Oregon Department of Agriculture applicators, we'll be able to offer 1 recertification credit for the entire day, and that's the same for the Washington State Department of Agriculture as well. So we'll be able to offer 1 recertification credit for both of those. So when we do prompt you, please make sure to have your license name and number handy, and just go ahead and copy it and paste it into the chat. The other icon that you'll see is a Q&A icon. We'll be using at the end of each presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers or a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put those questions into that Q&A box. We will not be using the chat to answer any questions. So if you do have a question for any of our presenter, please make sure to put it into that Q&A box. After the presentation is over, our questions will be read out by the great Mitch Bixby, who's our Education and Outreach Committee Chair. And he'll be reading those as they come in on a first come, first served basis. So if you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to put those in. If we do run out of time for questions, we'll also be providing the speaker's email address in the chat. And we can send that up as a follow-up to anyone who wants to touch base with our speakers after the event. And finally, at the end of the day today, you'll be prompted to take a short survey as you exit the webinar. That survey is a huge help for us in helping plan this and future pull togethers. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple of minutes to fill out those questions, I believe there's only 9 of them. It is a really big help for helping us put on these events. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Aaron.
Thank you, Andrew. First up, we'll hear from Troy Abercrombry with Western Invasives Network. Troy's a coordinator of WIN, and he will be sharing some updates from the network as well as a preview of a new digital resource created for our 4-county CWMA integrated weed management calendar. So take it away, Troy.
Thank you, Aaron and Andrew. And it's so nice to see everybody showing up today. A lot of folks out there, and real happy to be able to be here with you all today and share some updates from WIN. For anybody not familiar with WIN, if you're new to the area, new to the discipline, WIN is a network of 10 different CWMAs across Western Oregon. And my role as the coordinator of WIN is just to help facilitate activities of those CWMAs, from really simple tasks all the way up to complex event planning and technology things. And so basically on call as needed for whatever the CWMAs and their membership organizations need. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint real quick. And so what is up at WIN? The network is so diverse. And so what that means is I got to put on a lot of hats. And I wish I had more time because there's always more opportunities to do more stuff that could benefit the network. But one of the big things that happened recently was WIN was able to sponsor GIS platforms for any interested WIN network CWMAs. And I know that many of the CWMAs took advantage of that opportunity and are currently in the process of building out those ARC Online resources, and we'll be sharing those with their membership, and hopefully that'll really facilitate some information sharing and some more projects. So I was happy to be able to do that. Lucky enough to be able to provide some financial support for some really great partners this year. The Willamette Aquatic Invasives Network has launched a kind of a new campaign and rebranding called Wapato Revival. It comes with a new strategic plan and a beautiful website. If you have not checked out the new website, wapatorevival.org, I highly recommend it. It's really well done, and it's going to just continue to grow. Also supported the Willamette Native Plant Partnership, and then last summer was able to support the Columbia Gorge CWMA with some bike and boot brush trail kiosks that have some outreach and education components to them as well. I also represent the Western Invasives Network on the Oregon Invasive Species Council. And so if there's ever anything that you want to bring to the council, you can just reach out to me, and you have a voice now at the head of the table. I was recently elected as the chair for 2022. So looking forward to helping the council advance statewide objectives, and looking forward to help bring any of your needs and concerns to the council so that that group of partners can look into whatever we can do to help facilitate your needs. Put on a couple webinars and some presentations. Did get a couple in-person ones in this year, which was nice, that sponsored some pesticide education credits for folks. So that was great. And then always putting together the WIN quarterly newsletter. As soon as it comes out, then I get started on the next one. And that one comes out next week. So if you have any submissions, please get them to me as soon as possible. It'll publish next week. And if I don't get them, they won't go in. And the next opportunity is 3 months from now. So if you've got things to share, whether it be job postings, project highlights, whatever it may be, anything you want to get the word out, please let me know. This is what I'm really most excited about recently is just expanding the network and being able to make new connections with partners across the state. The Jackson and Josephine CWMAs are technically not official WIN CWMAs in that they have not signed a WIN MOU, but they are a long-standing group of great partners who all do some really great work. And there's been a lot of transition over the last few years down there, and been maintaining contact with and engaged with those partners down there to try to do whatever I can to help out. But most recently working with Dan Sun, who is the Central Oregon IPM specialist for ODA, the new Central Oregon specialist, helping him facilitate the creation of WIN's newest CWMA. So the Klamath County CWMA is now an official group. A lot of motivated partners from, excuse me, I'm battling a little bit of sickness here. A lot of motivated partners from state, federal agencies, county, and some nonprofits. They've got a lot of great ideas already. They've got a lot of synergy between the needs of certain partners versus what other partners are able to provide. And so they're really going to hit the ground running, and really excited to kind of close the loop down there. You'll see that map, the big gap down at the bottom is starting to get filled in with the creation of the Klamath CWMA. So really excited about that. And then always trying to build out or expand the existing resources of WIN and of WIN partners. And what that has meant most recently is building out the 4-county IPM calendar. This was updated and re-released in 2020. It is hosted on the 4-county CWMA website as a PDF, and it is the original brainchild of Portland Metro. It's got a ton of great info on over 50 species, phenology notes and treatment types and timings, different warnings, lookalike species, and a lot more. And it's a great document, but for my way of thinking, I was like, man, is there any way to make this a little more streamlined, maybe a little more intuitive as a digital resource? And hopefully that would enable the ease of sharing, ease of updating this thing, rather than having to publish a new document all the time, but then also facilitate customization of this document and the expansion of this document as it moves forward. And so I was able to secure some funding and work with the Cwma group out of Portland to create this digital resource. It's currently in beta form. There's still some errors. I've got some vetting to do with the 4-county technical committee, and we're having some hiccups on the IMAP invasive side, but we're working through that, and this thing will be live by the time field season starts this spring. And so I want to show you some of these. So this is a gallery view. This is really a quick glance and acts as a resource hub for any of the 51 species that are in the IPM calendar. You'll notice that only one of them has a picture and the rest of them are blank. And that's because I really want to rely on 4-county partners to submit high quality photos that you've taken in the areas that you work, in the plant communities that you work on them in, so that we'll have the most relevant photos. So I'll be sending out a call for photos real soon and hope to really get some good ones from all of you so that I can populate these photo fields. But say you wanted to look at garlic mustard and learn some quick facts about garlic mustard, you just click on that species card and it'll give you some real basic information. And then and then some more complex information. It can link out to the 4-county fact sheet. It can give you an overview of some of the different treatment types that you can use for that.
You've got 2 minutes, Troy.
Okay. It can also link out to IMAP distribution maps, and can be really expanded to whatever extent that we want it to. When you go, stop share there. Go. Can we do this in 1 more minute? If you wanted to get straight to the killing, you can go to this view, and for any of the species, you'll see the different treatment types. You'll be able to see the different treatment months for a given treatment type, as well as any species notes, attachments, additional BMPs, and things like that. Eventually, as that gets built out, it may wind up looking something like this. This is a Oregon Invasive Species Council resource of early detection species across the state, and you'll see that the fields are loaded full. You can add tons of different photos, as much information as you could ever possibly want at the click of a button. You can link out, you can link to reporting, and you can really build a pretty amazing database. So that's what I'm working on. Got a little ways to go, but I'm going to lean on the technical committee and the membership of the 4-county CWMA. And eventually we will have a really nice resource that folks can pull up in the field. They can embed on any websites, whether you want to embed the whole thing or just a portion of a suite of different species in a certain taxa. You can do that, and they will update automatically. Anytime an update happens in the core spreadsheet that runs this whole thing, every website that has it embedded will automatically get updated. So there's no management necessary for you to be able to provide and host a resource that stays current at all times for anybody who you want to share it with.
Nice work.
My time.
Troy, is there going to be a follow-up meeting or a rollout meeting on the app?
Absolutely. Like I said, I'm gonna rely on the technical committee to give it another good once over, make sure that everything got transposed properly. We just took everything from the PDF document and put it over there. We didn't add any information other than some links. If it wasn't in the original document, it is not, we didn't take it upon ourselves to add any kind of anecdotal information. If it's not in the original, it's not on there, with the exception of linking out to external resources like the fact sheet or distribution maps and things like that.
Sweet. Thanks, Troy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. It looks awesome. And if anyone wants to get in touch with Troy, you can check his contact information that I believe has been put in the chat. So thanks again, Troy. Hope you're feeling better. And we're on to steering committee update, which I can provide. So the CWMA is now up to 24 member organizations, and that strong support and resulting partnerships are really important to our collective weed control efforts. A goal of the steering committee is to continue to enhance and expand our resources and our collaborative platforms, especially in these times, and help us overcome some of the challenges we're all facing and to better serve the community at large. To that end, we're continuing to expand our membership to include more organizations who can add resources to help us meet that goal. And I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage any attendees representing organizations who have not yet become a member or a sponsor of the CWMA to do so. You can speak with our coordinator, Courtney Gattuso, for more information, and her information will also be available in the chat at some point today. As for the work that the committee's doing, the signature activity right now is to update the 4-county website. And we have a subcommittee that's meeting regularly monthly now to review and update content in preparation for site redesign in the next month or two, trying to take advantage of this window where we're not doing as much work outdoors to make as much progress on the website as we can. The goal is to be sitting here next year, potentially demoing the new website and the new features to enhance our collaborative platforms. We also have open steering committee positions. And if you're interested in serving and your organization is within the Fort County CWMA boundary, you can contact Courtney as well. Open position terms are 2 years. So we'll have a Clackamas County rep currently represented by Andrea Berkeley from Metro, a Clark County rep, which is Justin Colell from Clark County. And we have a new at-large rep, which is a new addition this year. And then we have 2 committee chairs, mapping and data, which is Tyler Pedersen, and technical science and science, which is Michelle Delapine from West Multnomah. And as a committee chair, you can also serve as an associate steering committee member. Those positions are up for election this year. And the committee chair positions are up for election as well. So Courtney will put out a call for nominations to our listserv. If you're not on that, you can also contact Courtney to get on that. And yeah, please let us know if you have any interest in those positions. And then I also want to thank all of the steering members and the committee chairs for their service and contributing all of your time and expertise over the years. It really makes our organization stronger. So that's it for me on the steering committee. And with that, we can move into our first presenter, which is Tony Koop. Tony Koop is a risk analysis with the Plant Pest Risk Analysis Group of the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS. Over the last 15 years, he has prepared and reviewed several hundred weed evaluations, helped develop the foundation and structure of the lab's weed processes, and helped organize 6 weed risk assessment WRA training groups. He also helped the development of APHIS's WRA model, its guidelines, and several other weed assessment tools. Tony is a plant ecologist and has been working on invasive plant issues for over 25 years. So Tony, if you're ready, please take it away.
All right, thanks. Can everyone hear me and see my slides?
Looks great, Tony.
All right, thank you. So today I'm going to be talking to you about our tiered weed risk evaluation process. Our process has evolved quite a bit over the years, and I just wanted to share with you what that currently looks like. For those of you who don't know me, I work with USDA APHIS, Plant Protection and Quarantine in our Science and Technology group, and more specifically in our Plant Pest Risk Analysis group. There's about 40 to 50 of us in our lab that all focus on doing pest risk analysis. Myself, I specialize in weed risk assessment. PPQ's mission is to safeguard our natural resources against the entry, establishment, and spread of harmful pests, both economically and environmentally significant pests, and at the same time facilitate safe trade of agricultural products. My specific role within the agency is to provide science-based information on weeds and their risk. Now, APHIS regulates weeds in a couple of different ways. Like states, we have our own noxious weed list. There's about 111 species on there, and these are prohibited from entering into the U.S. or moving in interstate trade. In order for them to come in or move in trade, there needs to be a specific permit to allow them to move, and then it'll be under certain conditions. We also regulate plants under our plants for planting regulations in a new regulatory category that's called NAPRA, or Not Authorized Pending Pest Risk Analysis. And what this means is that we found some evidence that these plants can be either hosts of harmful pests or weeds themselves. And so we do not allow them into the US until, let's say, somebody actually requests their entry, and we will specifically evaluate them more carefully. Right now, there's about 53, and actually I think it's a little bit higher than that, weeds listed under this regulatory category. Now, we use several different types of assessment tools to determine whether or not plants are potential candidates for either of these lists. A risk assessment, for those of you who don't know, is the evaluation of the likelihood of an adverse event and the associated consequences. Now, that adverse event may be different for different groups and agencies, but for our group, it is the entry, establishment, and spread of a plant pest that we're trying to evaluate. Now, whenever a weed comes across our desks, we first run it through a screening and prioritization tool. This is a very quick, simple analysis that we do. And the goal of this analysis is to figure out whether or not this weed falls within our mission scope. If it's a native plant, widely distributed exotic, a widely cultivated exotic, it really falls outside of our scope. And so we will move on. But if it does fall potentially within our scope, we will then characterize its risk potential with a weed characterization. This is a very simple analysis. And here, we're just trying to figure out whether this plant meets regulatory criteria, whether it's a potential NAPRA or a federal noxious weed candidate, or simply we might need more information, a more detailed look. If we think it is a potential candidate for NAPRA, then we'll simply convert that characterization into a NAPRA data sheet. It's a very simple process, takes about an hour to do. But if we think it's a potential candidate for our noxious weed regulations, then we will do our much more intense weed risk assessment process, where we'll really run it through the gamut, and then our decision makers will take a look at that assessment and decide. Now, so far, those analyses that I've presented are all about evaluating the risk of the plant. But we recently developed a new type of analysis called a weed risk analysis. And here we're not only concerned about the risk, but also whether we can manage that risk. And I'll be talking to you a little bit more about that later on. And finally, we've done a few kinds of assessments where the focus isn't on the risk, but it's on the status of the species. You know, we know it's a bad plant, but what is it actually doing in the US? All right, so when we complete one of our analyses, our decision makers will review the analysis and then make a decision on what our policy for these weeds will be. Now, sometimes one of the possible choices is it's going to be a non-quarantine weed. That is, these are usually going to be native species, widely distributed exotics, plants with a very low risk potential, or plants that are been here a long time and are widely cultivated, and there's just, it falls outside of our scope. Now, on the opposite end, our decision makers may decide that, yeah, this is a quarantine weed and we're going to want to regulate this. Now, here, these kinds of plants are going to be plants that are either not here yet, or they are here, but they have a limited distribution. So something potentially that falls within our scope. But there needs to be clear evidence of impacts, and it also needs to meet criteria for either one of our two regulations. Finally, most of our weeds that we evaluate end up falling in this middle category where they're potential quarantine weed. These are plants that are not here or have a limited distribution. They might be harmful, but right now there just isn't enough information to merit regulating them. They don't have enough evidence of impacts, or they're here and no one has really expressed any interest in them. No one in the US, that is, our stakeholders. So what we end up doing is putting them in this sort of on hold category where we'll go back and look at them later on, either within a specific amount of time or when new information becomes available. So this is pretty much the outcome of our three different types of analyses. So now what I'm going to do is review these analyses with you in a little bit more detail, starting with our screening and prioritization process. This is a very quick evaluation. It takes about 10 to 20 minutes. It's informal, it's qualitative, it's evolved sort of organically over the years. Essentially, we're just gathering information on the identity of the species. That is, what is its current name? What family is it in? Is it present in the US? About how many states or counties? You know, how widely distributed is it? Is there any evidence that it poses a threat? That is somebody in the US regulating it? Is somebody outside the US regulating it? And also, have there been any other risk assessments? Is there any evidence of invasiveness or impacts? And finally, is there any evidence that it's in cultivation in the US? Our ultimate goal is, again, to figure out whether or not these plants fall within our mission scope. If the answer is yes, then we will assign a priority for further evaluation. Now, a quick snippet of this Excel file, this is where we conduct our screenings. It's a very informal place, and it's essentially every species has its own row. We record the species, the names, when we came across it, notes. The stuff that you see on the right side of that image is basically columns where we input all of the information that we're gathering. Yes, no, any very simple kind of queries or results. And then what happens is the Excel will actually look at that information, and based on a formula we created, it'll prioritize that weed for further evaluation if it does fall within our scope. So it's a very quick and simple process that we use to prioritize our plants. Okay. Our weed characterization tool is also a fairly straightforward analysis, or I should say assessment. It's a qualitative evaluation. It can take anywhere from a day to 2 days to complete, ideally 1 day. It's about 3 to 5 pages of text. And essentially what I tell people, our goal here is to really skim the surface of the literature. What is out there? What is really known? What are the major points about this species? And so we'll record again information on the taxonomy, nomenclature, where is it native to, where it has been introduced, and what is its status in other countries? Is it naturalized? Is it invasive? Is it regulated? Well, same thing for in the US. What is it doing? What kind of habitats does it invade? What is its entry potential? What are the different ways it could enter the US or move within the US? What features about its biology are contributing to its ability to establish and spread? We're not looking for specific information. We're just gleaning the literature, the web, to see what is bubbling up to the top. And of course, information about its impact potential. We will summarize what we found in a 1-paragraph summary, put together a lit-cited, and in an appendix, we actually have a very simple decision tree analysis. This analysis sort of mimics the results of a full-blown weed risk assessment with just 5 questions. It's about 90% accurate. And essentially, our goal is, if we were to subject this to a full-blown WRA, what is the most likely outcome based on these 5 key questions? Okay, and that's pretty much it for the weed characterization. All right, NAPRA data sheet is also simple and straightforward. Basically, this is a shorter version of a weed characterization. And the reason it's its own document is because this is the document that we're required to produce whenever we try to regulate a plant under our NAPRA regulations. It just has information on the plant, what is its foreign and US status, and a very simple 1-paragraph summary of its biology and impacts. And that's it. And this is what is shared with stakeholders when a proposed rule comes out on the Federal Register. All right, now let's move into our weed risk assessment process, which is our Cadillac of assessment processes. We first developed this about 10, 11 years ago. This is a semi-quantitative assessment tool. It is an actual predictive model that was developed and validated with 204 known US non-minor and major invaders. The analysis itself is done in an Excel environment, summarized in a Word document, where we briefly summarize its biology and the results of the analysis. In Excel, it looks pretty much like a checklist. It consists of a series of mostly yes or no questions with a few multiple choice. We record our answers in that first blank column, and then next to that, we'll record our uncertainty with all of our answers in qualitative terms such as negligible, low, moderate, high, max. That is, how uncomfortable are we with our answers, all right? It's sort of the opposite of how certain we are of our answers. Once you put in an answer, Excel will spit out a score for the questions. And in that last column, we put in all of the evidence, reasoning, and resources that we cited to support that answer. Now, there are 4 elements of risk that we evaluate in our WRAs. We use 23 questions to evaluate the species' ability to establish and spread, like does it produce seed? Is it dispersed by birds? Is it resistant to herbicides, etc. 18 questions evaluate its ability to cause harm in natural, agricultural, and anthropogenic areas. 36 questions are about its geographic potential in the US, and 14 are entry. It's really the first two risk elements that are the heart of our predictive model that give us that result of low risk or high risk. And then once we have those answers, we then run that through an uncertainty analysis that I'll mention more about in a second. The information from the geopotential section we use to develop a climate suitability map of where in the US the species is likely or the climate is suitable for it. And finally, the entry potential we'll assess when under certain conditions, like if the species is not here, we want to get a gauge for how easily or likely it is to enter the US. Because again, our mission scope is really to try to keep things out or keeping new invaders from spreading further. So usually when I'm talking to people about our weed risk assessment process, I tell them, look, our documents are about 20 pages long, but if you just have 5 minutes to look at our two key results, you pretty much know what's going to be going on with this species. Here is one of our key results, and let me get my pointer out here. So in this graph is a representation of our risk space. The x-axis represents the species' ability to establish and spread, and the y-axis is its impact potential. The higher the number, the greater its capacity to establish and cause harm. Now, the score for the species we're evaluating is shown as this black point that you see right here. The other 204 points that you see on this graph are the species that we use to develop and validate our model, and they're plotted here for reference. The non-invaders are shown as these teal triangles, and the major invaders are shown as these red X's, with the minor invaders as the yellow points. Now, I told you we also do an uncertainty analysis, and what that means is we do a simulation to figure out how confident we are in the results, how robust our results are. And so what we do is we ask the question, what other risk scores are likely if we happen to have changed, or if we change in the future some of the answers to our questions? And the way that works is we go through and we randomly generate an answer for every question based on the uncertainty level of that answer, of each answer. The higher the uncertainty level, the more likely that answer is going to flip to something else. And once we do that for every question, we will then generate a new risk score. And then we repeat this a total of 5,000 times to generate these 5,000 scores. And that's what these boxes here represent, is the results of that simulation. Think of this as kind of like a confidence or error bars around our observed risk score. This inner box right here represents the inner 50th percentile of those simulated risk scores. Then the outer box represents the 99th percentile. And you can tell by the size of the boxes how much uncertainty there was. And I can tell from the size of this that we had pretty high, average to high uncertainty with this species. But even though no matter how we change some of those answers, look, the results keep coming up high risk. So we're pretty confident that we have a solid high risk species. And that is how we use our uncertainty analysis. Now, one last point about all this, the risk score from our weed risk assessments represents the invasive potential of the species in an ideal environment, because we're getting this information from all over the world. And usually the places where we're finding information on the species are places where it is weedy and problematic. So our WRA results sort of represent a sort of worst case scenario based on what is currently known about the plant. Now, we also then do the other core result is our geographic potential analysis. Here, we will look to see where a species occurs throughout the world using lat-long point observations and other occurrence data. We'll figure out where it occurs with respect to three variables: plant hardiness zones, total annual precipitation, and also Köppen Geiger climate classes like rainforest, tundra. And then we'll figure out where in the US all of those three variables co-occur. So in this map, the areas that you see in white represent the areas where the climate is not suitable whatsoever. Anything that you see from pink to burgundy represents areas of suitability. Now, the different colors represent now our uncertainty, or certainty rather. In this case, we kind of flip it around. The darker the color represents the more certainty that we have that the climate in that region is suitable for the species. And it's based ultimately on the number of points from around the world where we found that species occurring. So we're very certain that this species can occur in the southeastern US, but when you get up into Illinois and Missouri, we're not as confident, right? And you could probably assume that if this is a high-risk species, that it'll be problematic. It'll definitely naturalize and probably be problematic in the southeast, but it may only just be able to establish and not really cause much harm right further north, because the colder it gets, or as it moves away from its ideal climate, it's not going to be as happy or robust. Now, more recently, we've also been including these polygons showing where the species has been reported in the US. And sometimes, usually we just show you those polygons. Sometimes we do break it out between naturalized or cultivated or just reported if we can't parse it out from the literature. Now, because the US represents, has pretty much every kind of major climate in the world, right? We have tropical forests in Puerto Rico and Hawaii. We've got tundra in Alaska, deserts, moist forest, prairies. We can't really incorporate climate directly into our weed risk assessment. We really have to keep the two separate so we don't bias assessment. So it's really up to you guys, the users of our assessments, to of course sort of integrate the two for your jurisdiction. So for this high-risk plant, right? So let's assume this high-risk plant is a tropical plant. And obviously, it's not going to be high risk in Alaska, but it could be high risk in Hawaii. So you have to sort of meld the two, figure out how the two work together for your jurisdiction to make whatever decisions are appropriate. And as I said before, we take all this information, we summarize it, and we put it together in this Word or PDF document at the end of the day. All right, moving on, and I gotta turn off my pointer here again. Our weed risk analysis. So as I mentioned before, risk assessment is evaluation of the likelihood of a adverse event and its consequences. But when you start also considering risk management, that is how you're going to manage that species or whether you need to manage it, you're really going from a risk assessment to a risk analysis, because analysis is the combination of both of these things. All right, and usually the goal is to evaluate the risk, identify the best mitigation strategies and that are needed to reduce that risk to an acceptable level. Now, when would this kind of analysis be useful? In our case, we developed it for when we're having to evaluate potentially invasive plant that has also some potential benefits, where it would be there's interest in cultivating it commercially. And so we want to evaluate whether it's possible to mitigate the risk of it escaping. So in this analysis, we're looking to see what evidence, what is its risk potential, what are the different ways it could escape from these production pathways, what are some potential mitigation options, and whether, again, we can reduce that risk to an acceptable level. Now, some examples of where this kind of analysis would be useful. Well, I know you guys in Oregon, I think 10 or so years ago, you were thinking about cultivating a Rhododendron or giant reed as a potential bioenergy crop. This plant is a major invader in the southwestern US, but if it's grown in, let's say, a typical type of field, it may not necessarily be able to escape. It's really only problematic along riparian areas. So if you can keep it from escaping from fields, it could potentially be grown, right? So a weed risk analysis will be very useful in these cases, but also new fruit crops, right? People are always thinking of new kinds of things to cultivate for fruit and vegetables, but some of these might be invasive. This is a hardy kiwi here in the middle picture. It is a congener of the kiwi fruit we all know, but you can see it produces great size clusters of fruit. But this plant can escape and become invasive. And you see a picture here from the New England area of the US where it has done that. I would expect it could also probably establish maybe there in your region, but I don't know. I know you guys tend to have a drier summer. Another situation is when you're dealing with trap crops, right? Here we've got a picture of lychee tomato. This is a tomato plant that is potentially, or it is a trap crop for potato nematodes, which are a major pest. And this trap crop is very useful at lowering, reducing enormously population levels of this nematode in the soil. But because this plant is weedy and invasive in other parts of the world, it could potentially escape and become problematic. So this is certainly another potential application for a weed risk analysis. And by the way, this is actually the first application or use of this tool for us. And I'm going to be giving a talk on this analysis, 2-hour presentation, February 19th. And if any of you are interested, just shoot me an email and I can make sure to forward the announcement for that when it comes out, in case you're interested. All right, to give you some details of how this weed risk analysis works, it proceeds through 5 phases of analysis. In the first phase, we start with the general weed risk assessment to sort of set the baseline risk potential of the species in an ideal environment. And again, this is based on global information about its biology. And the only thing we do different here is we divide the risk space into 5 regions of risk as opposed to 3. This is only to make the process work a little bit easier, to give us a little bit more granularity in the risk potential of the species.
You've got 5 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. In the second phase, we will do the overall geopotential analysis as I described before, and then we will figure out, so if the crop is being proposed for cultivation, let's say in Nebraska, well, according to this, the climate is not suitable. And if we have a very high risk plant, then the risk of it becoming problematic in Nebraska is going to go all the way down to very low. It could still be grown, right? Perhaps as an annual crop, but the risk will go down. Now, if on the other hand, they're talking about cultivating it in Florida, where the suitability is very high, then the baseline risk potential of the species does not change and we'll keep it as is. In the third phase, we consider region-specific information. So far, everything's been based on info from around the world. Here, we will see what do we know about how the plant grows and behaves in the region where it's being proposed for cultivation. We'll gather information on basic biology, plant fecundity, dispersal, growth rates, whatever. Ideally, we would have that information from not just fields, but also natural areas and disturbed areas around those fields to see how it might do in different kinds of settings. We will then, based on that information, adjust the species risk score either up or down or not at all. And we would document everything, our rationale and our uncertainty. In the fourth phase, now this is where we start considering the pathway itself. We'll evaluate the unmitigated risk of the species escaping. First, we'll gather information about the how it's going to be cultivated. Is it going to be harvested, let's say, before it begins flowering and reproducing or afterwards? Because that can have a big impact on its risk potential. We will then determine the likelihood of it escaping during 8 stages of crop production and processing, starting with seed transport. How are those seeds going to be, or propagules, going to be transported from wherever they're coming to those fields, to the growers? How are they going to be stored? Planting, is there any risk of it escaping during planting? If you're planting using a seed drill, then maybe those seeds might remain in the drills and potentially get established in other fields with some other crop, right? Can it escape from the fields through natural dispersal? What about transporting it from the fields to the processing facilities? Are there any opportunities there for escape? So we'll do this for these 8 stages and generate a likelihood of escape, and then we will integrate that with the species baseline or the species risk potential from phase 3. And ultimately, we're going to determine whether or not the risk is acceptable. Because, for example, if we have a very low risk plant and it's very likely to escape, the overall risk is going to be very low, right? Because that is sort of the baseline risk potential of the species. So that's why we have to integrate these 2 results to figure out what is the risk and is it acceptable, and whether or not we need to monitor or mitigate that risk. And finally, in the 5th phase, if the risk is not acceptable, we will then identify potential mitigation measures and consider their effectiveness in reducing the risk. So we'll identify those mitigation measures, re-estimate the likelihood of escape. And here's a very quick example. Let's say that it could potentially escape when the fruit or seeds are being transported from the fields to the processing facility. Maybe there might be an accident and the fruit fall off the truck, or there's a bump in the road or something like that. In this case, you want to keep the fruit or the propagules in sealed containers or covered to minimize that risk. And then finally, we will re-estimate the risk of escape to, again, determine whether or not we need to adjust anything or if we've reduced the risk enough. All right, last but not least is our weed status assessment. This is a very simple tool. This is a descriptive tool, not a predictive tool. Basically, we use it when we know the species is invasive, but we just want to know what is it currently doing in the US? Where is it now? What are its impacts? Is anyone doing anything about it to control it? We will use this to determine whether a species should be deregulated. And some of you from Oregon may recognize shining leaf geranium here.
Hey, Tony, we're at time.
All right, 1 more minute.
Cool.
So here we've got the assessment is pretty straightforward. We gather, again, background info on the species, its biology, where is it right now, how far, where has it not invaded, how much further can it spread, what impacts has it had here in the US, what impacts has it not had based on impacts elsewhere in the world, is it likely to cause these additional impacts, and what are people doing about it? Are they doing anything? States, counties, NGOs, other federal agencies? Is it difficult to control? So we'll put all this together in a report and submit it up the chain. And that's pretty much it. Once we complete our assessments, they go through a tiered review process before they're cleared. Our decision makers will look at it. If they think it should be regulated, they'll submit it to the Federal Register, at which point our stakeholders, you guys, will have an opportunity to comment on the assessment and to comment on the proposal to regulate them. And then our managers will take a look at that, consider everyone's comments, and publish a final rule. And since we developed our processes, we've evaluated this number of species using each of these tools that you see here. And that's it. Any questions or comments?
Tony, thanks.
Yep.
So we have a few minutes for questions, and there are a few questions in the question and answer tab. If you've got questions in the chat, I won't be looking at those. So if you do have a question for Tony, be sure that it's in the Q&A tab. The first one is, can you provide some of the most common examples of data sources you use for species information in the weed risk analysis?
Yeah, pretty much it's anything we can get our hands on. We have a pretty extensive library, with a physical library and a digital library of books, of conference proceedings, of plant lists of weeds from different parts of the world and countries. We have about 600 references in our digital library alone. So that's usually where we start off. We also were located at North Carolina State University, so we have access to a lot of library resources. We also have access to our national USDA agricultural library. We'll look at agricultural databases, environmental databases, those kinds of places. And we'll also do both Google Scholar and general Google searches. So pretty much anything we can get our hands on.
Next question. Are there example WRA Excel sheets available that can be shared?
Yeah, I can certainly share the Excel sheets if you want them, but what we do share that's available on our website is the Word versions of the assessments. Again, that will have not only a summary of the assessment, but it'll also have an appendix with the entire Excel portion in there. So you can take a look at that. These PDFs can range anywhere from 10 pages to 30 pages, depending on the complexity and the amount of information on each species. You can just Google APHIS weed risk assessment, and you should see it as one of the first top 2 or 3 results. If you can't find it, just message me and I can send you a link. Now, we have been doing these weed risk assessments for a long time, and our process has sort of evolved over time. So if you just wanted to see an example of our current process, I would recommend you sort it by date posted and take a look at some of those. And yep, that's it.
Great, thank you. The next question's a little longer. It seems there are exceptions to the limiting criteria for listing. Goat's roof springs to mind, already widely distributed, cultivated, and locally abundant in the Intermountain West. Is this an historical artifact of a lack of distribution data? Is it a determination of relatively high negative impacts?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Our mission as an agency is to focus on species that are not yet here, or if they are here, they have a limited distribution and are under official control, either by us or perhaps some other state agency. Species that are widely established in the US or regionally widely established, it's really beyond our scope, our mission scope. At that point, really you need to look to other federal agencies or state agencies for leadership in managing those. So now, if there is enough political willpower, of course, it is possible to list some of these species, but generally that is not what we do. We focus on species that are not here or widely distributed.
Great. I think that might be related to the next question. Is this assessment done for all nursery imports? What triggers a risk assessment?
Good question. So if a species is unprecedented, for example, it's never been imported before, then that will trigger a weed risk assessment. Once a country, if a country wants to export something to us on a trade level, we will definitely take a look at it. If it meets some of our criteria there, then we will definitely evaluate it more closely with either a weed characterization or a weed risk assessment, whatever is necessary. But if it's already cultivated in the US, or if it's already widely established, or if it's been precedented, for example, poinsettias, right? Then we will not look at it from a weed perspective at all. If we find a new detection of a species in the US, then that will certainly trigger an assessment.
Sweet, thank you. How many times have you gotten it wrong?
Actually, that's a good question. It's something that I think about, right? It's actually an impossible question to answer, because plant invasions tend to move at a very slow pace, right? We've only been doing this for 10 years. And sometimes it takes, decades for a plant to get over that lag phase, before it starts spreading and escaping. And even more years go by before it starts displaying evidence of invasiveness. So, I tend to think of these weed risk assessments not so much as getting it right or getting it wrong, more as this is a summary of what this species is capable of based on information from around the world. Or if we happen to be evaluating a US weed, this is sort of a summary of what it has also shown to have a potential here in the US. Now, like weather forecasts, right? I like to draw an analogy between weed risk assessments and sort of weather forecasting, although weather forecasting happens on a much more quicker pace, right? Information is constantly changing, right? New information might come in and that might change the risk assessment. This lychee tomato, for example, that I'm going to be talking about in a couple of weeks, we first did a weed risk assessment for that in 2013, and it came out, I'm going to make this up. I'm going to give you a number here. Let's say it got a value of 13 of a risk score. Well, let me correct that. A probability of invasiveness of about 80%, let's say. But we would turn around because of this particular request. We just reevaluated about 9 years later. And guess what? We found some additional information, not only additional resources that we never saw the first time, because now there is more information being put on the web, but also there's been new research. And so that changed some of the answers to the questions. And so that increased the risk score. So now the probability of invasiveness is up at around 92%. So it's always changing. And I would argue that, if you look at a weed risk assessment, and any weed risk assessment out there, you want to make sure you look at the date of the assessment. You want it to be relatively current. And I would argue that, probably more than 5 years, you really want to start updating that assessment. I would love to be able to do that for all of our assessments. Unfortunately, there aren't that many of us doing weed evaluations. I'm pretty much it and one other person. But if there's a particular need, we can go back and evaluate it. But think of it as sort of weed risk assessments as a current status, and it should be periodically reevaluated.
All right, that is all the time we have. Thank you for that, Tony. That was fantastic. It's a ton to think about.
All right, thank you.
Aaron, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Tony. That was great information. If anyone is interested in following up with Tony, has additional questions or is looking for more information, Courtney will put his contact information into the chat. And with that, we'll move on to Pamela Slaughter with People of Color Outdoors. Pamela was born and raised in Portland, and she is a retired Adult Protective Services Investigator and is a real estate broker in addition to being founder of People of Color Outdoors. So Pam, if you're ready, please feel free to take it away.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm going to start by talking to you about the nonprofit that I started, a little bit about me and how I came to start the nonprofit. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to read something that I wrote and show you some pictures of us at the same time. This is the story of People of Color Outdoors. I know the sweet sound of bird calls and water flowing over rocks. I know pine-scented air, the peace of deep shade, and the solid presence of towering trees. I know that nature soothes, heals, energizes, sparks creativity, inspires, awes, nurtures, teaches, liberates, and humbles. I've known since childhood that we can't live a full experience as human beings if we don't spend time in nature. I have loved the outdoors as a child, and when I was 10, 3 things happened to solidify that love. The first was my Uncle John moved to a small farm outside of Portland. I remember jumping from the hayloft and jumping down into the hay, catching frogs at the pond, and sitting for hours in a big tree, reading or watching wildlife. Sometimes he put me to work, milking the goats, feeding the chickens, and collecting eggs. Caring for the animals gave me a sense of confidence and competence. Exploring the pond enhanced my sense of adventure. Learning to identify and understand plants, frogs, crayfish, insects, the many waterfowl and other birds made me feel like my world was a big and exciting place. The second thing that happened that year was I went to Camp Westwind, my first overnight camp. It is located in Otis, Oregon on a peninsula. It's across from Cascade Head. When you're at the top of Cascade Head and you look down, you're looking at Camp Westwind. It is bordered by the Salmon River on one side, Old Growth on the other, and the ocean on the last. And it's one of my favorite places in the world. We take a ferry across the river to get to the camp, and it was my first time ever being on a ferry. I was enthralled by the fish and the crabs I could see in the clear water. My cabin was surrounded by huge, beautiful trees. Out its door was a path that led up to a bluff that overlooked the ocean. I was 10 years old and obsessed with Harriet Tubman. I thought about her often, especially at night. On the first night of camp, I decided to see if I could find the Salmon River, which was north of my cabin, by using the North Star and feeling the moss on the trees the way Harriet Tubman did. I slipped out of the cabin when the other girls went to sleep. There were no lights, so I was navigating by the moon and stars, just like Harriet. Well, I quickly realized there was moss on all sides of every tree. I also realized I didn't know which star was the North Star. There seemed to be thousands more stars at camp than at home, and they were all incredibly bright. Well, I ended up wandering up to the bluff where I admired the velvety sparkling sky. I watched the rhythm of the white-tipped crashing waves, breathed the salt air, and listened to the owls. I created stories about all the other sounds I was hearing around me. It was magical. It fed my imagination and my curiosity, and it filled me with a sense of freedom and adventure. The third thing was visiting my mom's family in her hometown, Chicago. I spent much of my time in Chicago feeling stunned and disturbed. There were buildings so tall I couldn't see their tops, even with my head thrown back. I missed the woods. My favorite time in Chicago was spent in my Aunt Dorothy's backyard, watching the squirrels play in the trees. I was only 10, but I realized that I needed the woods to feel good and be happy. When we returned home, I biked to a nearby wooded area. A weight felt like it just rolled off me when I heard the alarm calls made by the birds that spotted me. By the time I reached my favorite tree and climbed it to read, I felt light enough to float away. I was only 10, but I knew that I needed nature. I remember sitting in my tree, feeling really sorry for the people that I had just met that summer who didn't even know about the woods, and they certainly didn't know they were missing out on a very important part of life. My mother and grandparents moved to Portland from Chicago during World War II and lived in Vanport, the town made overnight to house new arrivals who were building the Liberty ships. During the war, and then for a few years after, it was one of the only places in the region Black people were allowed to live. In 1948, the levee holding out Smith Lake broke. It destroyed the town in an instant. My family lost everything in the flood and couldn't return back to Chicago. They made their home in Portland and fell in love with Oregon's beauty. I have fond memories of grandparents, great-grandparents, my 7 aunts and uncles, and any of our frequent visitors from Chicago caravanning it out. We went to the country, to the ocean, woods. We would enjoy the river, hike trails, go fishing, and have lots of picnics. I did come to understand that some white people didn't like us because we were Black. Once when we were at the state fair, a young white girl pointed at us and told her mother, "Hey, look at the N-word." Her mother was mortified. She slapped the little girl hard in her face and told her not to ever use that word. And my grandmother told that woman that the one that needed the hard slap in the face was the person that taught the little girl that word. The woman grabbed her daughter and rushed away. So I was aware that there were racists, but as far as I knew as a child, we didn't really have any negative encounters. Still, as an adult looking back on it, I sometimes wonder now if maybe we went in the big groups to be safe. I found that the older I got, the less my Black friends wanted to join me outdoors. As an adult, only my white friends wanted to go outdoors and hang out. Many of my Black friends shared stories of verbal or even physical attacks and threats. And sometimes they just didn't want to be stared at. I don't judge Black people for avoiding the outdoors. I've done it. When I became a mom, I wanted my children to have the same relationship with nature that I did. I was divorced and my children were small, and I decided to start them out going out on walks in the woods the way I did. I had occasional encounters with racists and skinheads on the trail. But after one really hateful encounter, with my young children present, I was left shaken, and I felt irresponsible and almost neglectful for even bringing my kids to go hiking with me. And that was the end of it. That was the end of our family hikes. We had thought of ourselves as explorers, free to pick a trail, pack our food, our water, our journals, and then we'd go out someplace. Sometimes we would just pick a place off the map that we'd never been to before, and sometimes we would have a specific destination in mind. But every time we went out, we expected to see something beautiful and exciting, and we did every single time. It might be the first patch of trillium on an early spring day. It might be a bald eagle with a wiggling fish on its talons, or a log almost completely covered with little garter snakes warming up in the sun. Our legacy as explorers was done. It was preserved through our journals, through our photos, through our memories. We began our new legacy as family camp members, environmental students, and volunteers. We were usually the only Black people present, but I felt safe in those structured environments, and at least we were out in nature. Years later, I walked into a school with my 10-year-old grandson to drop him off for day camp. The room was full of rambunctious children excited for their adventures. We heard a big crash in the next room, followed by utter silence. And then a child piped up and said, "Don't worry, we'll just say that that brown boy did it." And they all agreed as my grandson and I stood in the room listening, just shocked and disappointed. I immediately saw that my idea of structured environments being safe was not necessarily correct. My grandson saw it too. Racists were in the structured environment, conspiring to cause my grandson harm because of his color. It showed my grandson that his white peers held his skin color against him in camp the same way they did in the classroom at school. That was the last time he was willing to go to camp. But I refused to allow the outdoors to be taken from us. From his birth, I had been reclaiming space in the outdoors for him and for me, for us. When he was a baby, I put a crib outside so he could be with me as I gardened. When he was 3, I started going on walks with him and his 2 best friends, who happened to be my little nephews, his first cousins. In our family, we call them the tripod. When they were 9, we started taking the first of our now annual road trips together. They are 17 now, quickly becoming men. From the garden to today, I've instilled in them that nature is there to help them heal and thrive. We enjoyed our time together, but we were consistently the only Black people on the Wakayakum Ferry, or hiking at Opal Creek, or bird watching at Oaks Bottom, or riding the jet boat at Hell's Canyon. Wherever we went, white people wanted to know what we were doing there. No one ever said that, but they asked questions that basically said that. Hello, what program are you with? Hi, what school do you work for? Hey, what does your group represent? I would respond, we're a family enjoying time outdoors. Sometimes I would point out a large white family and I would say, now that's a big group. What program do you think they're with? And most people then got my point. I regularly had to assure the boys that it's okay for us to be there. It's okay. We didn't need reservations. No one needed to expect us. They're asking us why we're here because they're not used to seeing us. But it was annoying to have to constantly do that, and it didn't make them feel good about being outdoors. It made them feel nervous. I felt desperate to go outside with people who would welcome me. And one day I Googled Black people hiking together. I discovered a group called Outdoor Afro, founded by a woman named Rue Mapp. I wrote her, and the next thing you know, Portland had its own Outdoor Afro chapter, and I was the leader. And it was wonderful. My first Outdoor Afro training was at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Conservation Training Center, which is a huge 533-acre campus in Virginia. I learned how to lead events safely while creating community. And I was there with leaders representing 33 other states. I came back home excited and energized, ready to go, ready to share Oregon's beauty. And I had monthly events, which were popular, fun, educational, but it was a lot of work. And after a couple of years, I decided to take a break. When I took a break, one of my members constantly asked me, when are you coming back? When are you coming back? And I decided I wasn't coming back. I ended up taking a break and stepping down permanently. And then he asked me to start a new group. Finally, he asked me to start a new group, and if I would start a new group, he would run all the activities until I felt like getting back to work. Well, that got my attention. I started imagining my own group. I thought about all of the people, Indigenous, Hispanic, Asian, people who were from other countries, people who had come to me and said, look, I don't have an afro, but I want to spend time in nature, but I've had some really ugly experiences and I don't want to go by myself anymore. And my friends don't want to go out with me. And I ended up starting People of Color Outdoors in July of 2017. The group attracted people from all over the world, different socioeconomic backgrounds, ages. The thing everyone has in common is a desire to enjoy nature and feel safe and even welcomed in nature. So in 2020, after the pandemic hit, I started to get all kinds of calls from people who were suffering in ways that I had never heard before. People's roommates were being racist towards them. People they had lived with no problems were now starting to be cruel and invite people over that were mean. People were leaving the state. My members were leaving the state. People were distressed. After George Floyd's murder, a lot happened in terms of just people becoming negative, and people and my members were responding, and some of them were becoming negative, and they felt the need to be out in nature more. So we started scheduling a lot more outings. In 2020, we did 30 outings. In 2021, I think we ended up at 48 outings for the year. And we do all kinds of things: hiking, trail running, biking, canoeing, fishing, bird watching. We've done all kinds of things. And in 2021, we had a number of firsts. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to come on to talk to you about what we did in 2021. Oh no, I'm not going to stop sharing my screen because I'm going to be talking to you while I show you what we did. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to announce the biggest, most important thing that happened to us first. We were honored to become a Willamette Week Give Guide participant, which means we got to participate in fundraising to get our first part-time staff member. And we raised a little over $30,000. And so we're very, very excited about that. We also started a new partnership with the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. And we started out with Mauricio Valadrian and Ben Pittenger at Lower Nehalem area. You'll see pictures of that later. And that's very exciting. We were able to go out to the Nehalem area and learn about preserving land. And we saw elk, and it was just a wonderful time. The picture that you're looking at is a picture of children at Whitaker Ponds during a walk, a multi-generational walk. So grandma was there, great grandma was there, some great aunts were there, and little kids, and it was just a wonderful time. This photo is, do you see the osprey in the corner, in the right corner by that snag? So there was a pair of osprey punching the branches and carrying off great big branches to rebuild their nest. So the children got to watch the osprey do that. And then we drove over to Smith and Bybee Lakes where the nest is and saw them putting the branches in their nests. So it was a very wonderful educational time for our other first, which was our first summer school called People of Color Outdoors Guardians at Whitaker Ponds. One of the cool things that happened with our guardians was when I happened to tell them they were being noisy when we were canoeing, and I told them that if we were silent for 5 minutes, animals that were afraid of their outdoor voices might come out and show themselves to us. So we stopped paddling and we put our timer on, and before the 5 minutes was up, a deer came out with her fawn. And that was a first for any of us. I've been going to Whitaker Ponds for 15 years and I've never seen a deer until that day. And we saw it within 5 minutes of being quiet. So the kids are always quiet. They were quiet for the rest of the week. This is a picture documenting one of our other firsts, which was a trip to Camp West Wind for an overnight camp. It was wonderful. We had a big mixture, multi-generational families. We also had our first overnight camp at Champoy State Park. That was adults only for people that really needed a break away from the kids. And then my camp was this one, Camp West Wind. And I said, hey, bring all the kids. That's my sister and me early in the morning when the tide was out, exploring tidal pools at Camp West Wind. You can see Cascade Head in the background. That's an untouched sunset at Camp West Wind. This is Estella Ellaby. She is one of my sources of inspiration. On hard days, I think about her and the difference she made. This woman was the first Black, well, the only Black Multnomah County Parks superintendent in the 70s. And what she did while she was the park superintendent, they were in charge of the areas that Metro is in charge of now. Well, Metro had an agreement with the Bureau of Land Management that Bureau of Land Management could come in and take old growth trees out. They had a schedule to take the trees out. The plan was to slowly harvest those trees for money. And they could also take out any trees that fell, any trees that look like they might fall, any trees that look sick, were dropping branches, etc. So lots of trees were taken out through the years. We got to a point where Oxbow Park had 92 acres left when Estella Ellaby took over, and she stopped the policy. So guess what? Over 50 years later, Oxbow Park still has 92 acres of untouched old growth forest, and that's thanks to her. On a recent trip to Oxbow Park, we counted over 100 nurse logs that would have been dragged out according to policy and sold for lumber if it hadn't been for her. And we found 2 nurse logs that had fallen in 1988, and they each had over a dozen, easily over a dozen trees that are literally growing on them. So when you look at possibly 100 trees, more than 100 trees with a number of trees and plants growing on them, you can imagine over time the impact that they will have just from being there. And we just can't imagine the impact that would have taken place if all that was gone and continuing to be gone. I think 50 years later, with continual old growth being taken out, I don't know what would be left by now.
Pam, you're at the 5-minute mark.
Oh, shoot. I always talk too much. Okay, I'll be fast. So this is us at the Audubon Sanctuary. Rowing, like I said, we graduated from doing double canoe rides only in the slough, where only when the water was 4 feet deep or less, to paddling in the Willamette. This is us at the rhododendron garden, just attracting geese. They thought we had food. We're birding at Ridgefield. And then this is at Leach Botanical Gardens. I'll just show this very quickly. we were in the Facebook community Facebook awards. People of color experience the same kind of racism in nature outside on a trail or going swimming. I started the group to have a safe way for BIPOC to enjoy nature. The great outdoors should be great for everybody. I want you to vote for us. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here and go back to the video. There we are. I mean, me. Here I am. All right, so I guess this is where I ask people if they have any questions, or do I have more time?
You've got about 3 minutes still.
Okay.
And if we go over a little bit, I think that's probably okay.
Well, all I want to say is that the important thing that we actually provide, it's not so, just as important as education is community, because we don't have a place anymore. Gentrification, old laws preventing us from being here, it kind of still has an effect to this day that BIPOC, we don't have a place. We don't have a place to go. And so one of our biggest and most important goal with People of Color Outdoors is to actually acquire some land so that we have a space. But even if I'm not there, or I haven't scheduled something or paid somebody to let us be in a space, I want us to have a place where people can go. After a hard day, parents can get in their car, get their bikes and go with their kids and go to a place without me, be with their family, take a walk and feel that they're going to be safe there. That's our big vision, is to have a space, community to connect with nature. So that's what I'd like to share with you about People of Color Outdoors, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Cool. I've got a couple here. Starting to fill up a little bit. First one is, our company has a large workforce of full-time entry-level environmental restoration positions. What can we do to better advertise outdoor career opportunities to Indigenous communities and people of color in the Portland area?
Thank you for asking. There is a listserv, a group called Environmental Professionals of Color and EPOC. And the group is very active on Facebook. So, but you could also email me. I think you have my email address, Pamela Slaughter. Well, actually, you can write me at, Pamela Slaughter at hotmail.com, and I could get you put on that listserv. But you can also join my Facebook group, PDX, People of Color Outdoors. It's an inclusive group for anyone that's interested in nature, focused on BIPOC, of course, but everyone's welcome to come. And we do share community news, resources, including environmental jobs. So you can post them there and post them to the listserv.
Sweet, thank you. The next question is maybe related. What are the best ways for organizations to support people of color outdoors?
Well, we could always use money. So if you want to contribute, there's a link on our website and on our Facebook page. We're all volunteers. This is our office. I rent it right now because I just don't have room in my little condo to do People of Color Outdoors business. But when we get more structure, more funding, then it will be less of my work and it will be more of, we'll have staff. We have staff money for staff now. So we're getting to that point, of being able to do less planning for events and have more volunteers do that. So that's helpful. Oh, another thing that helps other than donations is if you have outdoor gear that you're not really using and it's still good, like old binoculars, that would be really helpful. We go on a lot of bird watching outings, and we do have binoculars. We have 5 binoculars, and we're looking to add to that. But yeah, we're looking to have more of a gear library, older field guides. We also really could use access to land. If you have a place where we could picnic sometime, let me know. A lot of the times people share some place with me, and they'll say, you know, there's this really beautiful place. You just go this place and that place and that place. But, you know, it can be really nerve-wracking to park in a neighborhood, walk down a little trail that where people aren't used to seeing people that look like me. I've had the police called on me just as a realtor, just walking down the street looking at houses. So it can be helpful to have someone go with us the first time we go to a place that's new, especially if it's a place where we might run into something that might cause someone trauma. Also, I don't do one-time visits because I have found that that can be actually kind of stressful to go someplace new for the first time. And especially if you've been traumatized in the past, the first time, a lot of the times people still have a good time, but that wariness is there. And so some of the energy is spent double checking to be safe. The second, third time we're there, that energy level, the wariness goes down and the exploration and the excitement goes up. And so the more we're there, the safer we feel. The more we're there, the safer other people feel as they get more used to us being there. But yeah, the first couple times we go, if we have someone with us so that we understand how to be most efficient, and also we can ask questions of that person, it's very helpful.
Pam, did you say that you had a minimum number of times that you wanted to be able to get to a site?
3.
3.
Mm-hmm.
The next question may have been answered, but I'm going to read it anyway. What are some other limitations for the POC outdoors? For instance, transportation, timing, etc.
Transportation is our biggest problem. That's the number 1 problem. Most of our outings are free, and I try to schedule them on a bus line. Before COVID, we did carpools, but since COVID, you saw that one picture with people on the bus. So I had to do some fundraising for that trip to get the payment for the bus. That's our biggest obstacle. The second biggest obstacle is fear. I know it's hard for some people to imagine that people would be afraid or nervous to go on a trail where you might find such joy and have such wonderful memories. Who'd be afraid of walking on a trail at Tryon Creek, right? But that's where I had that was my last free walk with my kids. That's my last time being free with my kids on a trail, was at Tryon Creek, because of the skinheads we encountered there. And I went to school at Lewis and Clark Law School. I was on the trail behind the law school when that happened. I knew the area. I had been there a million times, but you know, the first time I went with my kids, that's what happened. And it was not my first time encountering skinheads on the trail, But it was the first time encountering them with my kids present, and so I have been back there, but it was 20 years later. 20 years later. Yeah, it was in the 90s when I went there, and it was in the late 2000s when I went back with my group. I didn't go back until I had my group. So it can be traumatic in ways that are hard to understand. Everybody heals differently. So that fear is a big obstacle. Like, my dad has never gone hiking with me in my life, and he won't. I probably will never get to go hiking with my dad because of his trauma. So that's the biggest thing, and I don't know how to. So what I've been trying to do to get around that is post a lot of pictures of us being outdoors, being safe, lots and lots of Facebook little videos, and just sharing that, hey, look, people care, you know, people are inviting us. Oh, we've been invited to a ranch in Deschutes County. We have been invited to a private camp, and we went twice. And so we have had some things happen that are helping people to get past that and helping people's perspectives to change. But it's going to take time.
Yeah, right. We've got a couple of minutes and a couple more questions. Pamela, thank you for this powerful and important presentation. What can non-BIPOC folks do to boost these messages and create a safer culture around recreating in and access to outdoor spaces?
I appreciate the question, and I would say, you know, be supportive as you can. I know everyone says, give me money, and that's all you hear. And I imagine that as white people reaching out to BIPOC and always hearing, well, give us money, that would be old. That would get old fast. But it's true. Money is the most helpful thing because it gives us the ability to do what we need to do to move forward. And so try not to feel exploited or unappreciated when people ask you for money all the time. I want to just say that. And then the other thing is join groups that are open to you, like my group, PDX, People of Color Outdoors. You'll learn a lot that way by being in the community, reading the questions that people have. Sometimes people share their experiences and ask for support. And a young girl, her family had finally decided to take the plunge and go outside of Portland and go on a trail, and they found it and they mapped it out and they did all these things. And then when they got there, walking up the trail with their new hiking sticks and their backpacks and everything, and then they were told by some hikers coming down, some white hikers, and they said, look, we don't want to ruin your time, but you're not going to be safe going up there. There's some very vocal, racist people behind us, and you're not going to be safe if you encounter them. We think you should leave. And it was a hard decision, but they turned around and they got in their car and they drove all the way back to Portland. That was last summer. That was in July of 2021. So there's a lot of work. Sorry, I actually forgot what prompted me to remember that story. What was it?
How to boost messages and create a safer culture around recreating.
Oh, yeah. So join the pages, see what's happening to people. Sometimes there's really nothing you can say, you know, reaching out to her and saying, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's what we all did. That's all we can do. And it's not something for you to feel bad about. You didn't do it. I don't feel guilty when I see somebody on TV that looks like me doing something stupid. And I hope that you don't feel personally embarrassed like you did something bad when somebody else does something stupid because they look like you. What you can do is by being empathetic and just physically being there, contributing and however you can, and share your pictures of nature and share beautiful places for people to go. And community resources like the job opening. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Right on. Thank you so much. We're out of time for questions. Thank you for coming to talk to us. It's discouraging. It's discouraging to hear that there's a need, but I appreciate your being open about it.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Aaron, back to you.
Yes, Pamela, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experiences with us. Just a reminder for everyone, if you have additional questions for Pam or like to reach out, her email is in the chat, and also the Facebook group she mentioned for Portland People of Color. There's a link to that in the chat as well. So encourage everyone to jump out and take a look at that. With that, we are going to take a 10-minute break. We're currently at 10:46, so 10:56 we'll come back and reconvene with a update from the Mapping and Data Committee. So thank you, everyone. And one reminder as well, be sure to type your name as it appears on your pesticide applicator license card for either ODA or Washington State Department of Agriculture. And leave that in the chat box to receive your credentials for the first half. Thanks, and we'll see you in a few minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. For the second half of the event, we will start with an update from our Mapping and Data Committee, and Tyler Pedersen will give that. He's with Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, the Invasive Species Program Coordinator, and he also chairs the committee with Jeffrey Lee. So Tyler, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Great to be here. I just had some updates from the Mapping and Data Committee for this past year. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, the Mapping and Data Committee seeks to promote an understanding of the region's invasive plant threats through data management, data analysis, mapping, and information sharing. This past year, one of our big ticket work plan items was the standardized data collection template. And the goal of this template is to provide CWMA partners with a standardized template that can integrate observation and treatment data across different data collection platforms like ArcGIS Online, Survey123, and IMAP Invasives. Last year, the committee finalized the standardized data template fields and definitions in Google Sheets. Further progress was made on developing the survey and control templates, and committee feedback will be incorporated from our November 10th and our upcoming February 9th meetings. We hope to have both of the templates finalized by this April. If you're interested in learning more and providing input, I encourage you to attend our upcoming February 9th committee meeting. To increase the overall interest in data sharing in our larger region, the Mapping and Data Committee hosted the second year of the data sharing contest. Last year, we offered prizes for the top 3 contestants with the most priority and call for data species reports. Despite sharing quarterly reminders about the contest on multiple email listservs and at committee meetings, we did not have anyone submit data by the 12/31 deadline. The committee hopes to see more interest and participation with the finalization of the data standardization template, as well as with greater capacity to safely engage with partners one-on-one in the face of COVID. Troy Abercrombry, coordinator for the Western Invasives Network, he continued to graciously host the regional priority species ArcGIS online map. The priority species are A-listed weeds, and purchased 2 ArcGIS online licenses for the Mapping and Data Committee. The map was shared with 7 partnering groups who have ArcGIS online organizational accounts. The committee developed privacy use agreements for the CWMA's public and confidential data layers, which is available to anyone who is interested in sharing and contributing data. We are currently in the process of migrating the priority species map into our new account. If you are interested in participating in the Mapping and Data Committee, please look for my email in the chat and contact me. There are 5 committee meetings this year on February 9th, April 13th, July 13th, September 14th, and November 9th from 8:30 to 9:50 a.m. And those are all offered virtually right now. I'd like to thank everyone, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the pull together.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. Up next, we have Tim Campbell. Tim Campbell is an aquatic invasive species or AIS outreach specialist for the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute. He's also the National AIS Liaison for the NOAA Sea Grant Program and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He supports AIS prevention outreach and communications and works to apply university and sea grant resources to AIS problems. Tim earned his bachelor's degree at the University of Notre Dame and his master's at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. Tim, if you're ready, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So I always hate to ask this question. Are you all seeing the presentation or are you seeing the presenter mode right now?
Looks like we're seeing the presenter mode right now.
Okay, cool.
I can't reach the internet
Oh.
right now. Check your modem or router.
And
Try again.
sorry,
So you can go to display settings at the top and that should switch into full screen mode.
yeah, so normally there's a button and it's hidden right now behind
give it one
like
more
the
try?
Zoom panel. Yeah, let's try this again. Oh, come on.
So at the top, there's a drop-down menu, says display settings.
Yep, and it's hidden behind like the mute taskbar.
On the
Let
right,
me try this again. Okay. It's like I've never done Zoom before. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, is that better?
Perfect. That's perfect.
okay, that looks good.
Okay.
Can you do a mic check real quick, Tim?
Yes, is this better? I moved it in front of my mouth as opposed to down by my chin.
I don't think we can hear you. Maybe try muting and unmuting.
I can hear you
Hi.
fine.
Yep, I got him fine. Might be something on your end, Courtney.
I can try again.
Oh, I think that's my end. Sorry about that.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that, everyone. Hopefully someday I'll be good at Zoom someday. Well, thank you all for inviting me. I'm excited to talk about some of our work on message framing and audience engagement for invasive species. Before I get too much further, just like to acknowledge my co-authors on this, Dr. Brett Shaw. He's an environmental communications specialist and professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Department of Life Science Communications, and he also has a dual appointment as an extension professor through the Natural Resources Institute, and then also our friend Dr. Barry Radler, who helped us out with the statistics because neither Brett or I are great at crunching numbers, and Barry is much better at it. So before we dive into all of the fun stuff, I figure I should tell you a little bit about myself and who I work for, just really quickly. If you're unfamiliar with the Sea Grant College program, we are administered through NOAA, and we are all based or administered through the land grant colleges in coastal states. So I think there are 32 programs across the United States. We promote the responsible and sustainable use of our Great Lakes and ocean resources through education, research, and outreach. And so we all have, in varying levels, outreach programs, communications programs, and research programs. And where you are in the country, everything looks a little bit different. Most states have different extension professionals like myself that have different areas of topical expertise. And I also am pretty involved with the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, which is a federal working group that coordinates all the different federal agencies that have some sort of role managing aquatic invasive species. NOAA is a co-chair on that. And I'm pretty involved both through the regional panels and trying to connect the regional panels with sea grant programs that can help address any, especially research or outreach needs that they have. And then I also help with the Education and Outreach Committee as a co-chair and just trying to do all the different things that are on our work plan. So if you have any questions about Sea Grant or the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, please send me an email or ask a question. I'd be happy to talk more about those. So what you all really want to hear about instead of Sea Grant and the task force is what's the best way to talk about invasive species. And spoiler, I'm probably not going to tell you the best way to talk about invasive species, but maybe let you know one or two ways that aren't the best and maybe one or two ways that are a little bit better. But I'm sure you all have seen different ways people talk about invasive species. There's this militaristic lens, fight the war on invaders. That kind of really leans into that us versus them mentality and doing everything we can to address the problem. Kind of on the other side of the spectrum, I've heard people advocate for trying to be really neutral and fact base when talking about invasive species. So that would be, having some sort of, kind of chart on like what the impacts and population levels of invasions are. So you could look at your chart and know exactly what a stage AB27 invasion is, and kind of what level of infestation that is. And then there's also, of course, in the aquatic world, stop aquatic hitchhikers, or any of the number of outreach brands, Play Clean Go, that exist. All of these have, I think, their advantages and disadvantages. But one thing that I don't think we collectively have a lot of is much information on how these message frames influence our audiences. I think a lot of us are operating under what we think might be most engaging, or kind of what makes, might motivate us to be doing something. And my 2 points to that are, a lot of times we aren't trying to motivate people like us to do things. People like us are already on board with invasive species messaging. We know we need to be taking action to prevent the spread of invasive species or managing invasive species. So a lot of times we might be communicating people that aren't as interested or aren't as interested in things as we are. And then I've also bounced around between Sea Grant and Extension and Wisconsin DNR through my time as an invasive species specialist. And I did a lot of the statewide communications for Wisconsin for about 5 years. And a lot of the conversations we were having kind of at the statewide level of how we should be framing things, it was a lot of, I think this, and we think this would be effective. And that always just kind of bugged me, because we have the tools to understand these things. So that's what we set out to do here. So we collected what we think are some good actual examples of the different kinds of frames that we have commonly seen throughout in both aquatic and terrestrial invasive species communications. So here's some examples of the militaristic frame. Like kind of that target on the plant in the upper left-hand corner, or the weed warrior is a pretty common message frame that we're using. But again, it's that us versus them. Let's leverage all of our resources to focus on this problem and take care of it. And really kind of leaning into that. We're at war with this species, but are we really at war? Like, probably not. Like, is lionfish, are they really the enemy? Like, lionfish are just kind of there doing what they do in the ocean, and we just happen to have a problem with it. So I'm not totally sure that the militaristic frame is fair. Same with the nativist frames. Kind of the bad guy, they don't belong here, stop the invasive alien. Anything that kind of makes you feel that unwanted other, which some people might think is useful for managing invasive species. They think it might make people wary of these things not from here and help them take action. But on the flip side, that there's a lot of things not from here that we value a lot of. I mean, I'm really bad with plants. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about plants. But if we look at, say, the Great Lakes, Pacific salmon are not native to the Great Lakes, but we love our Pacific salmon in the Great Lakes, right? So just because something's not from here doesn't mean that it doesn't have value out in our ecosystems. Of course, there's the hitchhiker frame, stop aquatic hitchhikers, just kind of like things hitching a ride and we're accidentally moving it along. I don't think we actually see this frame much outside of stop aquatic hitchhikers, but you'll see through our testing that we didn't want to test the stop aquatic hitchhikers brand exactly, and there's different work happening right now through the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force testing just that. So we just really wanted to test kind of this hitchhiker frame of just things kind of moving along, and not necessarily the drivers of environmental change, but kind of the passengers. Then there's also, more broadly speaking, in terms of environmental behaviors, just a protective self-efficacy message frame that we're just trying to protect the environment for future generations, and please do this thing to protect the place you love. And then lastly, our science and impact-based communication. So you may have seen all of the different watch cards that Sea Grant programs, the different programs have put together. It's just like pure information, like here's the thing, here's all the information about the thing, and who you should call if you see one of these things. And then I also put an example of one of those impact based charts that it really doesn't mean anything outside of maybe the figure text I didn't copy or the entire paper I also didn't include with that. But it's very specific at what the impact is there. So this is just me thinking out loud a little bit here, but this is actually some research that we're just wrapping up that we did after our metaphor paper. But like, what are some maybe quantifiable impacts of these frames? And we have been doing some research on aquatic plant management and property owners in Wisconsin, people that own waterfront property, and what their opinions on aquatic plant management, invasive species, and different management options are. And on the right are a bunch of people that somewhat agree or strongly agree that a chemical herbicide is worth using even if it harms native plants. So we have a handful of different questions where kind of the crux of the problem is that people seem to really want certain management strategies that don't really align with their management goals or what they value. And one of these is a preference for chemical herbicide use when it doesn't really get people where they want to go. And these people that really want chemical herbicide use score really high on a anger fear scale with invasive species on how invasive species make them feel. And we hope to be able to make this link somehow through some future research, but people are getting this anger and fear perhaps from some of this messaging, from the nativist messaging or from the militaristic messaging. So I think if we do a little bit more work, I think this is where we could try to link the use of some of these frames to maybe some stronger impacts. So after we looked at all the different message frames that we thought existed and that people were actually using in communications, we wanted to provide some actual data on impacts of the different invasive species message frames. We wanted to test these frames across different engagement metrics, because something Brett, as a environmental communication specialist, hears a lot is people like me coming to him for help and saying they just want to be engaging. But what does engaging mean? There's a lot of different ways people can engage with content. I know people that are engaging but don't really communicate very well or communicate productively. So what's your actual goal? So we collected a few different engagement metrics here, and we wanted to do this on Facebook for a handful of different reasons. One, we just wanted to try this method out. We thought that we could do this test a little bit more affordably than other methods, but then also, I think there's a lot of external validity in the Facebook test because, based on, or when compared to other ways of testing messages like this, of hiring panels or focus groups and giving people messages, that is in a real world setting, and Facebook is kind of real world, but people are just going out about their day looking at fishing videos or cat videos or whatever they're looking at in Facebook, and not necessarily expecting to engage in aquatic invasive species content. So this is actually how people act, not how they say they would act, which we thought was pretty useful. So here's our method slide. I tend to operate on the right because I like it drawn out, and I understand that there's a lot going on there. So if you like it written out, it's on the left. So what we did, we operationalized 5 different message frames: militaristic, nativist, hitchhiker, protective, and science, which we'll talk about here in a few slides. And what we did with these message frames was then run them through the Facebook ad manager. And we did 5 4-day message tests consisting of $250 for men and women. It'd be $50 per message frame on each of 5 message frames across 5 different time periods for a total of $2,500 spent, which we thought was pretty good for what we were getting. And for targeting, we targeted people that were interested in boating, fishing, and lakes in Wisconsin. So these are the people we usually want to be targeting with our communications. And for the project, we judge success based on cost per click and engagement. And this is a little resultsy here, but with this method and the $2,500 we spent, we reached more than 270,000 people, which we thought was pretty good. Although Facebook reach numbers are always really high. But something that we also did do that was quantifiable for our partner or our Facebook partner was that we increased their page following by 10% during the course of the project, which was really useful because then I think that was 100 more people that were in touch with their message after this project. So to operationalize the frames, this was a lot of fun. We were trying to combine art and science from previous work that Brett has done using conjoint analysis and I think different forestry message frames and messages. We know that visuals have a greater impact than text or just pure text in some of these things. So with the conjoint, they were moving around different text and pictures. And it turns out that the picture really had the most impact on how people felt about something. So we really wanted to make sure that we nailed what the picture we were using in Facebook and have the text support that and reinforce the message we were going with. So we worked with an artist since capturing some of these message frames in a photo would be pretty difficult, as you'll see that there's probably no way we could have done these with photos. And we pilot tested all of this at a fishing expo in Madison, Wisconsin. We had the artist and a graduate student just walk around the fishing expo and ask different people. We'd show them the drawing and say, hey, what's this make you think of? And for the most part, I think it was probably like 75% of people would hit on a word that we were looking for. So people were associating the frames with what we were wanting them to. So it was pretty cool. And again, this was a lot of fun. I feel like I should point it out because we don't always get to do really fun things. So drawing these and testing them out is a lot of fun. You all should try it sometime. So these are what our Facebook ads look like. So I think these were on mobile, or I took screenshots on mobile and plopped them in here. So you can see that the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership was our Facebook partner. We ran all of these ads through them so that we wanted something kind of neutral. So we didn't really want the University of Wisconsin running the ads because in Madison, if you're University of Wisconsin, that's great. If you are 3 hours away from Madison, in the Northwoods, people sometimes are less stoked about Madison. DNR has some of the same issues. So the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership was a pretty good neutral middle ground page for us to run our ads on. And then because we were running ads through an organizational page, we were able to use the different targeting features. So this is our science frame, just kind of a outboard motor prop with zebra mussels on it, just purely fact-based. This is our militaristic frame, stop the zebra mussel invasion. This is a little Easter egg for people. If you're up on your Navy battleship construction, Oconto, Wisconsin, or a company in Oconto, Wisconsin, Marinette, Wisconsin, has a contract to build these nearshore like battle cruisers. That's what these are in the photo. A few people picked up on that. That made me super happy. But I love the little zebra mussels on the boat. But these zebra mussels are invading our waters. Like, can we fight back? This is the most uncomfortable of the drawings. The nativist one, not native, not welcome. Really trying to amp up that feeling of the unwanted, threatening other. Here's our protective frame. Again, or self-efficacy, just like showing people how they can take action to prevent the spread of invasive species. Then here's our hitchhiker frame, just kind of like zebra mussels just kind of hanging out, hitching a ride, like really nothing wrong with them. They're just there. And this is, again, we use the Facebook A/B message testing for this. And so this is kind of what it looks like in Facebook A/B message testing. You're able to create all your ads and then you select a population to target and it will randomly show people the different ads. And so they'll just select 1,000 people each and show them the ads. And something that I neglected to say earlier. So when we were drawing these too, we were aware that depending on how we depicted each message frame, we might end up getting people to click on things, kind of like the shiny object effect. If one of them had a whole bunch of neon colors, that might catch people's eyes more than something else. So our artist took great care to use really similar color palettes and try to have things that have really similar visual weights. So if you look at these two drawings, you'll kind of see that it's maybe the objects are split in half in similar places, like similar word size, all that. So I think we tried hard to keep things consistent and minimize some of the variation in the drawings, even though all the drawings are different. So for the analysis, we used a three-way ANOVA, and I'll talk about this later, but we set everything up so we could do the inferential statistics since we knew we would need that for publishing. But there might be some utility in not setting that up this way, and you could do it for less money if you don't care about publishing. And our three-way ANOVA yielded a main effect for gender and framing, with men being less expensive to advertise to than women. I don't necessarily think that there's much there. You could say that maybe men are more interested in the topic than women, or that it's just generally more expensive to advertise to women on Facebook than men for whatever reason. And then there was also a main effect for framing. So the framing did matter in terms of some of our engagement. There were no two-way interactions. So like time period and frame, or time period and gender. So we did a follow-up analysis of the reduced model using multiple regression, determine how the frames differed from each other using the science frame as a reference. And we used a more conservative p-value, because something that, pro tip, always talk to the statistician before you do something, not after, because that'll help. But the way we set this up is we actually had a ton of things we were collecting and testing, and that's just a lot of tests and a lot of possibility for false positives. So we used a more conservative p-value of 0.01 to help protect against false positives, because we were running a lot of tests, and we really just wanted to report on the items of most management relevance, and not necessarily, some more detailed things that people can't act on. So here's a table of the results, a lot there. I'm just going to leave that there and move over to a table that I think explains things a little bit better. But if you're viewing the recording, here it is. And it's also in the paper that I can share a link to later, or make sure the organizers have, so that way you all can access it. So using science as the reference point, we analyzed the data on cost per click, sharing, and comments, because we think they all have different relevant management, goals associated with them. So for cost per click, science, nativist, and militaristic were all the same. They all came in at about like 60 cents per click, with hitchhiker and protective costing more per click, between 80 cents and $1. For sharing, everything had the same amount of sharing except for hitchhiker, which had more sharing, and they all had the same amount of comments. I think generally for men and women, these were all the same. That really the only difference was that it was more expensive to advertise to women on Facebook. But kind of the take-home point here is that the nativist and militaristic frames never outcompeted science, and in most cases, hitchhiker and protective. So, there's not really any need to use the nativist or militaristic frames. That we can get the communication outcomes that we want by not using those. And in some instances, so all of the comments were the same, but not all the conversation is equal. So, for example, on the nativist frame, this isn't really conversation I want associated with my aquatic invasive species program. It's at best bad oyster-sized puns, and I collected the one that was probably the best to share here, so there were worse. So this just isn't helpful conversation, but it was engaging, like people commented on it. But this isn't helpful in preventing the spread of invasive species or building a community around that. Whereas, the science frame and the protective frame, we get endorsements of this, or people talking about their experiences with invasive species and what they've done to prevent the spread of invasive species, which is what I would want, if I were posting, stuff on invasive species on social media. I want that positive conversation, not things that aren't helping move us to our goals. So what's the limitation of this work? We tested what is most cost effective at gaining attention, rather what to do once we have it. So I think this is better related to like fishing, like people are just scrolling through social media and stopping on things that interest them. So we might want to use different messaging if you have a workshop of 50 people, for example, that you already know are interested in invasive species, maybe different messaging is going to work there. And also have to point out kind of the difficulties with social media algorithms. If we did this experiment today, I think we'd get the same results, but social media algorithms are constantly being tweaked. So sometimes things might not be exactly replicable, which can be difficult.
So
and
at the 5-minute mark.
Okay, great, thank you. And while we made efforts to capture the visual essence of each message frame, art is inherently subjective. So if we had a different artist, my guess is a different artist would draw things differently and we might get slightly different results. But again, this would have been impossible to do with photos, how we set it up. So, I don't think we could have changed that necessarily. So I talked a lot about zebra mussels and aquatic invasive species. And so how can we maybe broaden this out a little bit? If any of you are interested in using this method, I think this method could be repeated for any sort of messaging. I know Brett has done it in like a local foods context, in forestry context. I think he's currently on a maple syrup project now, which sounds like a lot of fun and really tasty. So now that these methods are established, this is something that anyone could do, I think, for any sort of messaging. And we chose our exact methods because we knew we wanted to publish this in a peer-reviewed paper, but there might be different standards you might use for day-to-day use or marketing. I mean, it comes with like Facebook comes with an analysis tool built in, and it gives you like a 95% certainty that you would get this result if you ran this test again. So maybe that's okay for your use in day-to-day communications if you do any paid advertising. And even I've used it in much kind of less formal ways where, for example, on the left, I have a Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers brochure geared towards wading anglers here. And I had a bunch of different taglines I wanted to test, or I didn't know which tagline to put on the handout. And I got a bunch of feedback from people and it was pretty split. So I just let the masses decide on Facebook. I put $50 of advertising down. I used the same picture with different headlines and had a pretty clear winner with join your fellow anglers and protect our waters. So that's the one I used. I probably could have worried about that for like 5 hours. And instead I just set it up on Facebook and let Facebook tell me what to do, which was kind of nice. So just bringing it home, because I think I rambled about a lot of different invasive species communication things. The big kind of take home from our study is that we do not need to use message frames with potentially undesired consequences to achieve communication goals. We can use a science frame, hitchhiker frame, or protective frame. There we go. And some combination of those will all get us to the same place as a nativist or militaristic frame. And there is no instance where a nativist or a militaristic frame outcompetes the other three. And different messages promote different actions. So the science frame was really good at getting people to click through to learn more to the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers website. But interestingly, the hitchhikers frame was really good at sharing. So, depending on what you want people to do, it's really good to get people to share your message. So that might be good for more kind of organic reach. And we think that might just be that people are familiar with the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers message and they want to be seen kind of associated with that. And I think if we use kind of information like this and studies like this, we believe that good framing can maximize the desired actions we want people to be taking, at least online, whether it's clicking on something, having productive conversations, or sharing, while limiting any unintended consequences of our messaging. And someday in my free time, when I catch up on my work, like next week after I get this next project done, I'd really like to make messaging guidance for people that maybe aren't thinking about messaging with 100% of their time. I know a lot of people are managing a bunch of different hats, and outreach and communications might just be 10% of their job. So maybe we can create some sort of guidance or fact sheet to help people communicate using some of these best practices. So they don't have to guess about what to do, but they can use data to do it. So at that, my contact information is below. I'm also on Twitter, follow me there. This was one of our first drawings that we realized it didn't have any boats on it and didn't really relate to aquatic invasive species, but we really liked the little zebra mussels on tanks. So I like sharing it because this one's a lot of fun. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions that might be out there.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions. One of them, oops. First one is, was there further delineation of the harm natives question to differentiate short-term damage or long-term damage?
So Beth, I think that's in reference to the table of the study I referenced close to the beginning of the presentation. Seems like such a long time ago. I don't think there was. I think it was just harms natives. So I think that's all we had there. I'm sorry, I can't give you more information there, but if you send me an email, we have a technical report that graph came from, so you could dive into a little bit more of that if you're interested, because there is a bunch of different related things in there that you might find interesting.
Thanks. And the other question I have is, do you think the art added effectiveness to the messaging?
Yes, I think so. And I don't have hard data to back this up. I have a lot of anecdotal data from people that, especially on social media, there's just so many like photos, like, a couple of years ago, there was a big push for video engagement. And then now, like, especially on Facebook, you never just see text updates anymore. There's always a photo associated with it. So, it's pretty much not required, but if you want anyone to interact with your content on social media now, you almost need a photo or something. And it seems like the art and the drawings have been, just different enough to get people to stop and look at something. I think there was some outreach efforts with the Western Regional Panel that they've noticed that they get a little bit more engagement when they had their student intern like drawing different invasive species as opposed to just posting pictures of them. So that's something in my applied world I'd really like to look at a little bit. For example, our protective message was actually just a drawing of a photo we had of Chris Hammerla, the AIS coordinator for Golden Sands, like him showing somebody how to clean a boat. So we could just run that drawing right next to the photo and see if people engage more with it. My guess is that people would engage more with the drawing than they would the photo.
Nice. Another question's coming. Have you thought about repeating with pairwise analysis using a single photo with different messaging? It seems that the photo and the message could be confounding.
Yep, that's a good point. I don't think that was, I'm not necessarily sure. Let me walk back a second. We thought about it, but based off of what Brett has done previously with some of his messaging on social media, that we know that the photo is more impactful. We really wanted to do the whole package. That's something we could do, which I'd be interested in doing. I do know that there is a study out of Texas, 2018, 2019. I think it's Dr. Kyle. I could dig up the paper if people are interested, but that's exactly what they did. They had the exact same picture of a boat and using different messaging, I think, based off of like it's a law, or sorry, prevent invasive species, it's the law, prevent invasive species, different aspects of the theory of planned behavior. And so they did that and found some limited impacts of the text. But, I think with talking to Brett about some of this, that's not how people necessarily engage with the content. They engage with the content like the whole experience on Facebook and in posters. It's the visuals and the text. So yeah, I think doing something like that would have some internal validity, but we liked the external validity of testing the text and the photo together.
Right on. Next question. Do you have any ideas on if we should change from using the word invasive species as it holds its own militaristic bias?
Yeah, I have ideas. I don't know if I want to be a tone setter on that conversation. But I think what I try to do is I try to use invasive species only when I'm talking about a non-native species that has a known impact and that we are trying to manage for. I think about like Chinese mystery snails in Wisconsin. There are a lot of places, I'm sure it would be better if we didn't have them, but I think a lot of their impacts have been pretty minimal. I know that there's like some Chinese mystery snail person on the call that's gonna like tell me about the big impact that I should be concerned about. But things like that they're non-native, they might have some minimal impacts. I'm hesitant to call them invasive sometimes if I don't know that they have really strong negative impacts that we're actively managing for. If they don't, I tend to just stick to non-native where I can, because that, I feel like that has less of a bias than any of the other language we have. I do, this probably isn't a great answer either, but there is a really interesting session at the Joint Aquatic Sciences meeting coming up in May on message framing and metaphor use and aquatic ecology. And I'd be really interested in kind of asking that question and talking to other folks, really thinking about this stuff, what they think about that.
Right on. We've got about 4 minutes. I've got another question that's just come in. What do you think about referring to certain species as introduced as opposed to invasive or non-native?
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. And, I think kind of with this line of questioning, it's something that I would hope for coming out of this research. And I'm pretty sure, other people thinking about some of the same things as we are hoping for this too, is that we're just a little bit more intentional with our language around these things, just to make sure that there are no unintended consequences of how we're talking about invasive species. So, I think introduced is a great term because they are all introduced by people. And so that's pretty accurate as to how they got places without, assigning, any sort of non-native value or, problematic value that invasive or non-native might impose on them.
All right, fair enough. That is the end of the questions. Tim, thanks for talking to us. It's good to hear from somebody who's spending a bunch of time thinking about these things. I'm anxiously anticipating your review when your projects are done.
And yep, thank you, and thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you, Ray.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate the presentation, and I'll formally challenge John Wagner to come up with his own take on the stopping the zebra mussel invasion sometime in the next 10 minutes. So you're on the hook, John. Up next, we have Michelle Delapine. She will provide the Technical and Scientific Review Committee update. Michelle is the Invasive Species Program Coordinator at West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District and is also the chair of the Technical and Scientific Review Committee. So Michelle, when you're ready.
Hey everyone, and I should say chair for only another month. So if you are interested in that role, please reach out to Courtney. But yeah, I have in the meantime update for what we've been working on the last year. I'm gonna actually pull up on my screen our beautiful annual report, which if you haven't seen it, Courtney sent it out on the 5th of January. And it's a compilation of a lot of really great information that all of us partners have been working on this past year. And then there's a little summary for tech and scientific review. We had a in-person workshop looking specifically at Anthriscus sylvestris, which is also the wild chervil, and comparing it to Carophyllum temulum. There's quite a bit of the Anthriscus sylvestris up in Forest Park and popping up more and more in private properties nearby. So that was a really informative workshop. Had some great discussion there. We, as Troy mentioned, we both updated and then digitalized the integrated weed maintenance calendar, which is really exciting. So each year the tech committee takes a look at this and updates it. And then after this most recent update, WIN found some funding to be able to put this in a really cool customizable format moving forward that will help
Michelle?
us. Yeah.
Michelle, don't want to break in too much. No, but
Yeah.
do you want to try re-sharing your screen? I'm not sure that it's coming through.
Oh, really? Great. Yeah. Oh yeah, it looks like it didn't work. Sorry, guys. I'm still, yeah, tech unsavvy sometimes.
All good,
Can you
that
guys see it
worked.
now? Okay, cool.
Yep, perfect.
So yeah, this is part of the annual report for last year that Courtney put together for us. And some great information. We also have been looking at herbicide technologies. Justin Cooley's my co-chair, and he's been really, really helpful in reviewing some of the new treatment options that are underutilized that could be used more. And we also have been working with ODA on coordinating noxious weed nominations. And then we've recently hosted a Ludwigia working group, kind of splintered out of the technical group here that Mitch Bixby hosted. And lastly, I just wanted to, I don't think she's on here anymore, but point out this really lovely retirement tribute to Elaine Stewart that Jonathan Saul put together. That's also in the annual report. And Elaine, who many of you know was the chair of the Fort County CWMA for several years, semi-retired a few years ago, and she remained active in the technical committee. And so definitely wanted to throw a shout out to her. And really, she is an expert that I don't think any of us can replicate with all the experience that she has. And yeah, just a really great convener, cuts through all the red tape, really efficient at getting to the bottom line on things. And we're definitely going to miss her. So I think she's got like 11 more days left with Metro as a senior scientist. And thank you, Elaine. And lastly, just a call out again that if you're at all interested in chairing the technical and scientific review committee, please let Courtney know. And I think nominations are going to begin in February. So it's been really great. Yeah, that's all for now.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been great having your leadership on that committee, and you will be missed. Next up, we have Mitch Bixby. Mitch is the EDR Botanic Specialist with the City of Portland's Bureau of Environmental Services, and he's also the chair of our Education and Outreach Committee. Mitch.
Good morning, everyone. There's not a ton to report on the outreach and education front. It's been another strange year for an activity that frequently depends on face-to-face interactions. Those just haven't been happening. My hope is that this year we can find ways to get back out into the world with people and have the conversations that we're used to having with people. It also has been a bit of a drag not doing things in person, because in the absence of that, we have relied a little bit on surveys, and there's a lot of folks who are just sick of taking surveys as well. So that's a bit of a challenge that we're still kind of working around. A variety of partners are doing their own thing on the outreach side. I'm not going to get into that too much. The committee itself has focused more this past year on, and this year too, getting some of the content reviewed for the website review that Aaron referred to at the beginning. That's a big thing. Technical committee is also doing its share of review on chunks of the website. That's the big thing that's going on in the short term. And like I said, if we can get into a position in the summer where we can actually get out into the world and start working with people face to face, that I think that appeals to everybody. And that's it. That's my report. Back to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Mitch. And hopefully we can get back out in the world here shortly, or at some point in this year. Oh, so next up, John Wagner will join us. John is the senior rural conservationist at East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District and our resident and talented cartoonist who creates the illustrations in our event poster. And I think if you're ready, we can take a look at the cartoons that you've made so far in this event. All right, there he is.
Hey. Yeah, so this is always fun to get to do and present these in the moment. So yeah, as always, these are not comprehensive. These are watercolor comics. I'm going to share them. I just took a picture of them today instead of scanning. But I'll send out some high resolution scans of these comics later. Awesome presentation. So glad to be able to participate in this event. It's great every year. Yeah, I won't cover everything. I'm just gonna sort of skim over, but lots of talk of people wearing a lot of hats today. Troy does wear a lot of hats. Lots of cool things with wind. Really enjoyed the weed risk assessment, weed risk evaluation process. Especially, I kind of got riffing on thinking about the decision tree analysis, sort of like the Giving Tree, Shel Silverstein book. And I really want to make this book now. It would be so much fun. I kind of like the idea of the tree as sort of a mafia boss, and dropping an apple, is that's the risk score for a particular weed that needs to get knocked off. But of course, in the end, just like the regular Giving Tree book, like it's found out that the tree itself is a weed, and the boy has to kill the tree at the end. That would be the end. Keep the data granular, like that. Political willpower. I love this presentation by Pamela about people of color outdoors. Awesome stories. Really great message. We need more and more of this. Beautiful imagery about catching frogs, seeing wildlife. And of course, like Estella Ellaby at protecting all of the forests out at Oxbow. Really great message. We need more and more of this kind of message. More space, more community space for people of color to feel safe in the outdoors. And then lastly, this is going by really fast today. Of course, mapping and data. Tyler, gotta get the data in, submit some data, everybody, win the prizes, and then of course join the committee. And this is something I think a lot about, are the impacts of message framing on audience engagement. Obviously, when I'm wearing my hat as a cartoonist, illustrator person, I think a lot about what are the types of images that are engaging to people, but then are those images useful for continuing the types of conversations that we want to have? Aaron challenged me to do my own version of the zebra mussel. I didn't do that today. I was just picked up on the lionfish. Of course, these aren't necessarily real messages that you would use if you were trying to attack a lionfish, but kind of like a nativist of like lionfish taking their jobs. And then the science one would just have like a real picture of a lionfish, as opposed to a cartoonification characterization of a lionfish. Yeah, Facebook is sort of the real world, kind of. And pictures, we all know that pictures is the most important. And yeah, science is not always necessarily the most engaging, but it's often the most useful for advancing the causes we want to advance. And I'm sorry that I missed Michelle and Mitch at the end, but I had to take the pictures. And again, I'll scan these and send them to Courtney to share more detailed, high resolution versions. But that's it. Thanks again.
Thanks, John. I'm a little disappointed on the zebra mussels, but great take on the event anyway. And we'll find something else to challenge you on for next year. So
Maybe I'll do zebra mussels later. I'll
sounds
pick
good.
that up later.
Well, that brings us to the end, and a couple last minute items before you take off. Please remember to type your name as it appears on your applicator license card for ODA and WSDA in the chat box to receive credits for attending the event. There will also be a pop-up box when you close the Zoom webinar with a survey about the event. And hopefully you can take a moment and fill that out because it helps us plan for future events. And with that, I will see all of you in the virtual bar where Mitch from City of Portland will lead a breakout discussion on herbicides. Not really, but maybe next year. Thanks again for attending, everyone. It's really been a pleasure to host this event. And hopefully next year we can do all this in person. So thank you.